One of the questions that we seem to get a lot when it comes to running sound for the theater is related to volume. And it's kind of, it's basically a general question, how loud should it be? Or how loud do you run a show? Well, a lot of times people seem to think that there's one answer for every situation. A lot like EQ. A lot of times people ask me, well, how do you EQ something? That's not a one answer type of a question. You can't answer that with just one explanation because every situation is different. Volume's the same way. When it comes to, for me personally, when it comes to the appropriate volume for a production, it depends on the type of production. So for instance, if I'm doing Hello Dolly, I'm going to approach that one specific way. If I'm doing Jesus Christ Superstar, it's a completely different type of a show. That's a rock style show. It lends itself to higher volumes than, let's say, Hello Dolly. So I'm going to approach that show a little bit differently. But again, one goal that I always have is I want it to be natural. I always want the sound system to be transparent. I don't want the sound system to draw attention to itself. When people come to see one of my shows, I don't want them to automatically start thinking about the sound system. I don't want to do things with the sound system that's going to draw attention to itself. And one way I try to do that is I try to create a production where my volumes are natural. In the last video, we talked about using delay on the main speakers to help push the sound back to the stage, so it sounds like the stage is the source and not the speakers. Using volume control will enhance that situation and even help to define the space and location on the stage. If someone's standing on stage, if two people are standing on stage and they're having a conversation about what they had for breakfast that morning, I wouldn't want it to sound like a heavy metal concert. So every time I do a show, I'm always thinking, I want it to sound natural. I want it to make sense. I want the sound system to be transparent. I don't want to draw attention to it. So one of the things I always encourage people to do is to really take notice of the volume levels that you're running your show. One of the things that I always try to do is I try to force people in my shows to pay attention to what's happening on stage. I don't want the sound to be right up in their face. I want them to focus on what's happening on stage. So when they focus on what's happening on stage, their attention is not on other things. But if the sound is really loud when somebody starts talking or somebody starts singing and it doesn't make sense and it's not natural, now the focus is on the sound system and not on the stage. And I don't ever want that to happen. Well, one thing you can do beyond that is to control your volume level. And one of the things that I tend to do is I tend to keep my volume levels at a place where if you had your eyes closed, you could probably tell where on stage that sound is coming from. So I don't want the sound to be perceived as coming through those speakers first and foremost. I want the sound to appear as though it's coming from the stage. And when I keep the volumes down at a level that I think is appropriate and natural, you can really follow the sound as the actor travels around stage. Well, let's say you have a bedroom scene in Mary Poppins, and the set for that scene is a platform upstage. Mary and the kids are up in that bedroom having a conversation. Would it make sense that they would be as loud up there as they would be downstage in the kitchen scene? No. Even if I have the speakers delayed like we talked about in the previous video, having the volume up at a normal level will keep the sound up front, and though it may not be distracting, there is something unnatural about it. So when they are up in the bedroom, why not drop the fader a few dB? Not enough to lose their lines, but enough to create the space they're in and the distance that they are from you now. If you've never done this before, try it. It really doesn't take much of a drop to help push the sound upstage and create a more natural result of what you're seeing. This particular situation is one that calls for me to adjust based on where they are. But because of where I run my mix levels in general, many times the sound from my actors follows them around stage because the focus doesn't stay with the speakers, it stays with the actor. And by controlling your volume, you really allow sound to travel from the stage a lot more effectively. And it probably will go a long way towards making your show sound a lot more natural for the audience. So I would strongly suggest, if you want to take your show to another level and you really want to make the experience for your listeners as natural as possible, you want your sound to make sense, and you want the sound system to be transparent, really take a close look at the volume levels that you're running your show at. Because I think that you could probably find a little bit of room to maybe drop some of those volumes, not make it as loud as you think it needs to be. It doesn't have to be right in the listener's face. That's not a natural experience for them. Try to create a space that seems natural. Try to drop those volumes a little bit and play around with it during rehearsal. I think you would really be impressed with the effects that you can create just simply by dropping the fader a few decibels. All it needs to do is just take a little bit of that edge off, and now all of a sudden the actor really sounds like they're downstage right, or they're upstage left, or up on a platform. It really goes a long way towards creating a natural experience for your listener. And that should be the goal of any sound person who's running a show. You want the sound to be transparent. Here's what one person had to say about one of my shows.
I recently saw a production of Into the Woods with sound design by Dwight and the Good Sounds team, and it was so seamless, I honestly forgot that the actors were mic'd. The vocals, dialogue, and sound cues were centered around the action on the stage so well that my attention was never drawn to the speakers. I was able to enjoy the orchestra in the pit and the performances on the stage without ever being jarred by sound effects or volume inconsistencies. It takes a great sound team to create a transparent sound design that makes you forget that there is even an amplification system in place. Good Sounds was able to achieve that and complemented a great theatrical performance.
Play around with this the next time you're running your rehearsals. Try mixing a little softer than you normally do if you tend to be on the louder side. You might really enjoy the results that you hear. And with a system that's delayed appropriately, you can take your game to another level and give your audience an incredibly natural experience. One that is so good, they will just walk out and not say anything about the sound because they didn't even realize it was there.